Hello and welcome to lesson number 38 for junior English. Uh, we're still in the beginning of the second semester, so we're still kind of getting going for our second semester lessons. Today we're going to talk about voice and choice assignment number 2, which is due next Friday on the 12th. We're going to look at an introduction to our next text, the things they carried for literature, and for the informational portion of this course we're going to be reading an article together and annotating it for a potential inclusion in our next essay when we're talking about good and evil. The only assignment that has currently passed in the gradebook is voice and choice number 1. That is an extra credit assignment now due to some Google Classroom mishaps on my part. I'm going to explain that at the beginning of the lesson today. But also, upcoming assignments are voice and choice number 2 on the 12th, next Friday. Your first reading, the Zimbardo reading that we did together last week, will be due on the 5th this week. That's Friday this week. Your second reading, which we're going to be doing today, will be due on the 9th next week. And your third reading, which we're going to be doing together on Thursday and Friday, will be due on the 12th. So we will be doing all of these progress assignments in class together. There will be space to work on them in class together and walk through them. So none of these are homework. The mastery assignment, your first outline for this semester will be due on the 19th. We're going to be assigning that next week, so you have 2 weeks to do it. Your 15K extra credit booster is still an ongoing credit opportunity. I decided to just go ahead and leave that as a possible extra credit that you could pick up at any time during this semester. So if you're interested in grabbing that credit, you can write those tweets or those social media posts as the semester goes on. All right, let's take a look at our learning targets for the lesson today. Here are our learning targets and assessments for the Monday and Tuesday lesson. In writing, we're going to focus on the voice day for voice and choice. That means we're all going to be talking about the same topic. In our literature lesson today, we're going to explore the context and the author of our next primary text, The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. And that means we can recognize the impact of the setting, the context in his own life, and his history on the narrative itself. And for the informational lesson today, we're going to read and annotate our second article, When Good People Do Bad Things, to prepare for essay number 3. So this means you're going to have a collection of your thoughts, comments, and discussion points to potentially use in essay number 3 with either the first article or the second article. All right, so let's take a real quick recap of our week structure. Mondays and Tuesdays we'll have a formal lesson with those 3 parts, just like the one you're looking at right now. My office hours run from 12 to 2 on Wednesdays, and on Thursdays and Fridays there's another formal lesson with 3 parts, and in those 3 parts will be specific directions for assignments or readings themselves. All right, so the voice and choice for this week. The voice prompt for this week is, how should people be held responsible for their actions? So how should people be held responsible for their actions, either positive, negative? How do we hold people responsible for the things that they do in our society? And you'll be recording that on Vocaroo. The 10 path choice questions are posted also in that document, so you can go ahead and get a jump on that as well. And this assignment will be due next Friday. So we're going to stick with that question for this week and next week. How are people held responsible for their actions? And we'll stick with these prompts for this week and next week too. So I think we're going to end up doing voice and choice every 2 weeks, even though it's just a quick recording. I think we're going to spread it out just a little bit more to keep from filling up the week so much. All right, let's talk about our writing learning target for today. We're going to be focusing on the voice and choice assignment and how to complete that. A real quick explanation of the Google Classroom issue for voice and choice number 1. So I originally had voice and choice number 1 as a slide deck in Google Classroom. I accidentally edited that slide deck, which changed it to no longer reflect the original prompt. So if you've completed it already, or if you do complete voice and choice number 1, it's going to count as extra credit, and it will be exempted in the Infinite Campus for everyone else. You do still need to do voice and choice number 2 for the 12th of February. So voice and choice number 1 will be an exempted grade if you don't do it. It's no longer a required grade. However, you do need to do voice and choice number 2 for February 12th. And to do that, you're going to be making those two voice recordings or type response. The first response is to that prompt everyone has in common. Um, how are people held accountable for their actions? The second response is to that prompt that you choose from the 10 different career paths. And you're going to record your audio using the link on the slide that takes you to vocaroo.com. So what you're going to do is click the record button once you're there, record your audio, and then hit the close out square to end your recording. After that, you'll press the save and share button. It will give you a link. You'll take the link that it gives you, and you'll drop that right into the part of the assignment that says audio link. Copy your recording link here from Vocaroo. So you'll drop your link right there, and then you'll be able to submit. Don't submit until you've done both the first and the second part of the assignment. So the second part of the assignment is the choice prompt. So the choice prompt correlates to your specific path. Those paths are different career paths or interest paths. Each one has a little bit of complexity within it. So the artist is arts and visual design. The poet is language, poetry, and some advertising. The innovator is business, aviation, or trades. The journalist is journalism and law. The fittest is medicine and sports. The mentor is education and psychology. The gamer is games, game design, and music and games and game writing. The musician is music, sound design, production, and promotion. Old Glory is military and some constitutional law as well. And the author is writing for the screen, for the page, and for the stage. So all of those different paths are in those 10. So if you specifically have have a path or a career that you feel isn't represented here, let me know, and I'll try to incorporate it into the prompts as we go forward. So for the choice path, you're going to choose the path that you feel most interested in and respond to that prompt for this assignment. All right, we're going to have space to do all the work together in class, so there's no homework in this class. The progress assignments that are coming up in the next couple weeks: on the 5th, your first reading that we did last week, the Zimbardo reading, your 3 annotations are due Friday the 5th. On the 9th, next week, your annotations from the reading today are going to be due. And then on the 12th, your annotations from the 3rd reading, as well as your second voice and choice, will be due. You won't have anything directly connected to essay number 3 due until the 19th. We're going to start talking about that essay 3 outline next week, and we're going to start doing lessons aimed at that next week as well, too. All right, so for our literature learning target today, we're going to explore the context and the author of our primary text, The Things They Carried. So this means you're going to learn a little bit about Tim O'Brien, who he is, and what he believes about truth in Vietnam. This is from a Chicago Public Library biography of Tim O'Brien. He says, "Storytelling is the essential human activity. The harder the situation, the more essential it is. In Vietnam, men were constantly telling one another stories about the war. Our unit lost a lot of guys around My Lai, but the stories they told stayed around after them. I would be mad not to tell the stories I know." That's Tim O'Brien, and that's Tim O'Brien on the right side in his ball cap. He's almost always wearing a ball cap. That is Ha Long Bay in Vietnam in the background too. Award-winning author Tim O'Brien is best known for his fictional portrayals of the Vietnam conflict. From February 1969 to March 1970, he served as an infantryman with the U.S. Army in Vietnam, after which he pursued graduate studies in government at Harvard University. He worked as a national affairs reporter for the Washington Post from 1973 to 1974. The Things They Carried, published in 1990, is a collection of interrelated stories about the men of Alpha Company, an infantry platoon in Vietnam. The title page of The Things They Carried says the book is a work of fiction. It is narrated by a character named Tim O'Brien, who the author says is not himself, despite many similarities. The blurring of fact and fiction in storytelling is one of the most intriguing aspects of his writing. The book explores the process of storytelling and why story truth is truer sometimes than happening truth. In an interview with Publishers Weekly, O'Brien said that if there's a theme to the whole book, it has to do with the fact that stories can save our lives. In How to Tell a True War Story, the short story, O'Brien wrote, "A true war story is never moral. It does not instruct, nor encourage virtue, nor suggest models of proper human behavior, nor restrain men from doing the things men have always done. If a story seems moral, do not believe it. If at the end of a war story you feel uplifted, or if you feel that some small bit of rectitude has been salvaged from the larger waste, then you have been made the victim of a very old and terrible lie. There is no rectitude whatsoever. There is no virtue. As a first rule of thumb, therefore, you can tell a true war story by its absolute and uncompromising allegiance to obscenity and evil." So this is our third unit in 2020-2021. There's 4 units to the year. Our first unit was The Great Gatsby, Baldwin v. Buckley, and the American Dream and Race. Our second unit was about A Raisin in the Sun, The Color of Law, gatekeeping the American Dream through racially discriminatory housing practices. Our third unit, this unit, and it's going to take us out through our fourth unit as well, is storytelling and language as a tool to save our souls. So in this unit, we're going to be reading about Vietnam. We're going to be reading some poetry that is aimed at salvaging from suffering or response to trauma or finding joy in hard places. And that's going to kind of be the theme of our Unit 3. And for Unit 4, we're going to be doing voices and choices, writing ourselves into a better place. And we're gonna lean kind of on the voice and choice responses that you're doing in this unit as we go into Unit 4. Again, we're going to be doing all this work together in class. Green is progress, red is mastery. So if you're concerned about balancing the 50-50 in this class, those progress assignments are due on the dates they say there, and the mastery assignments are due on the dates they say below. All right, so our informational learning target today is that we're going to read an annotated article on morality, and that article is going to be one of the 2 articles that you can use on your essay, on the topic of how do people choose between right and wrong. Again, that essay is how do we evaluate what's right or wrong. It'll be an argumentative essay, and you're going to be using one of these articles as your support. So if you're taking notes, if you're making your 3 comments, and if you're making those comments complex and deep, then you're going to be doing yourself a favor when we move on to the outline and quotes for this next essay. The articles are in the Google Classroom under Mastery Assignments, under a assignment titled Essay 3 Materials Texts. You're going to choose 1 or 2 articles to quote in your essay, but you don't have to use more than 1 article to get full credit. All right, the article we're going to be reading today is titled When Good People Do Bad Things by Anne Trafton from 2014. And we'll be reading this together. This person is not Anne Trafton. This is Rebecca Saxe, who's an associate professor of cognitive neuroscience at MIT. She and her colleagues conducted an experiment to study the way people behave in groups. And as you read, we're going to be taking some notes on her experiment and the conclusion she and her team reached. You're going to be doing that through the assignment in Google Classroom for this reading, which is the same kind of assignment as the first reading. You'll be making 3 comments on the reading as we read. When people gather together in groups, unusual things can happen, both good and bad. Groups create important social institutions that an individual could not achieve alone. But there can be a darker side to such alliances. Belonging to a group makes people more likely to harm others outside the group. Although humans exhibit strong preferences for equity and moral prohibitions against harm in many contexts, people's priorities change when there is an us and a them, says Rebecca Saxe, an associate professor of cognitive neuroscience at MIT. A group of people will often engage in actions that are contrary or the opposite of their private moral standards of each individual in that group, sweeping otherwise decent individuals into mobs that commit looting, vandalism, or even physical brutality. Several factors play into this transformation. When people are in a group, they feel more anonymous and less likely to be caught doing something wrong. They may also feel a diminished sense of personal responsibility for collective actions. That ties directly into the conversation we had about Zimbardo last week. Saxe and colleagues recently studied a third factor that cognitive scientists believe may be involved in this group dynamic: the hypothesis that when people are in groups, they lose touch with their own morals and beliefs and become more likely to do things that they would normally believe are wrong. In a study that recently went online in the journal Neuroimage, the researchers measured brain activity in a part of the brain involved in thinking about oneself. They found that in some people, this activity was reduced when the subjects participated in a competition as part of a group, compared with when they competed as individuals. Those people were more likely to harm their competitors than people who did not exhibit this decreased brain activity. So some people get caught up in their teamness when they're on a team, and they lose some sense of self to the teamness. This process alone does not account for intergroup conflict. Groups also promote anonymity, diminish personal responsibility, and encourage reframing harmful actions as necessary for the greater good. Still, these results suggest that, at least in some cases, explicitly reflecting on one's own personal moral standings may help to attenuate the influence of mob mentality, says Mina Sikara, a former MIT postdoc and leader of the Neuroimage paper. Image here, the idea that if you reframe what you're doing as something that's necessary for the greater good, it's much easier to do harm if you think you're actually helping someone. So this is for your own good right before hurting someone or causing harm sometimes makes people feel more comfortable right before they cause harm. Group dynamics. Sakara, who is now an assistant professor at Carnegie Mellon University, started this research project after experiencing the consequences of a mob mentality. During a visit to Yankee Stadium, her husband was ceaselessly heckled by Yankees fans for wearing a Red Sox cap. What I decided to do was take the hat from him, thinking I would be a lesser target by virtue of the fact that I was a woman, Sakara says. I was so wrong. I have never been called names like that in my entire life. The harassment, which continued throughout the trip back to Manhattan, provoked a strong reaction in Sakara, who isn't even a Red Sox fan. It was really amazing experience because what I realized was I'd gone from being an individual to being seen as a member of Red Sox Nation, and the way that people responded to me and the way I felt myself responding back had changed by virtue of this visual cue. The baseball hat, she says. Once you start feeling attacked on behalf of your group, however arbitrary, it changes your psychology. I've read so many stories of people being attacked or bullied or called out while wearing Make America Great Again hats at this point that they all start to kind of run together. Um, some of it is potentially the person under the hat entering into a space where they're going to create a conflict, I'm sure. But some of it is also it's a symbol of a president whose popularity was really heavily debated in different parts of the country. So I think that it's fascinating that when you look at what just happened at the Capitol, and we're still kind of talking about that in the context of good and evil when we talk about psychology, and especially group dynamic psychology. When you're looking at people who feel as though they're being victimized, it's a really good example of people who feel as though they're being victimized when you can, if you wear a specific hat, you'll probably get at least some looks going your way. Sakara, then a third-year graduate student at Princeton University, started to investigate the neural mechanisms behind the group dynamics that produce bad behavior. In the new study done at MIT, Sakara Saxe, who is also an associate member of MIT's McGovern Institute for Brain Research, former Harvard University graduate student Anna Jenkins, and former MIT lab manager Nicholas Dufour, focused on a part of the brain called the medial prefrontal cortex. When someone is reflecting on himself or herself, this part of the brain lights up in functional magnetic resonance imaging (fMRI) brain scans. So when people are thinking about themselves, this part of your brain lights up in the front. The image I have here, I don't think is the frontal cortex, but the frontal cortex is right here. It's literally the frontal lobe, which is where a lot of your thinky bits that help you determine the difference between good and evil, right and wrong live. So people who have damage to their frontal lobe because of like whatever trauma to the front of your head, sometimes they struggle with determining moral statements, which is kind of interesting. A couple of weeks before the study participants came in for the experiment, the researchers surveyed each of them about their social media habits, as well as their moral beliefs and behavior. This allowed the researchers to create individualized statements for each subject that were true for that person. For example, I have stolen food from shared refrigerators, or I always apologize after bumping into someone. When the subjects arrived at the lab, their brains were scanned as they played a game, once on their own and once as part of a team. The purpose of the game was to press a button if they saw a statement related to social media, such as, I have more than 600 Facebook friends. The subjects also saw their personalized moral statements mixed in with sentences about social media. Brain scans revealed that when subjects were playing for themselves, the medial prefrontal cortex lit up much more than when they read moral statements about themselves than statements about others, consistent with previous findings. So while people were playing this game and clicking on social media, whenever they saw a statement about themselves and they were playing alone, just clicking on these links or clicking on these buttons that were attached to social media posts, when they saw things that they agreed with or things that were true for them, then this lit up because they were identifying with it. Oh, yes, this is me. Oh, yes, this is me. However, during the team competition, some people showed a much smaller difference in medial prefrontal cortex activation when they saw the moral statements about themselves compared to those about other people. What does that mean? Basically, whenever you get a group of people together to play this game, this psychology game, where they click on social media prompts and quotes that may connect to their personal lives, they're less likely to think about and identify with things that they previously identified with when they're in a group. The group has its own kind of identity. Those people also turned out to be much more likely to harm members of the competing group during a task performed after the game. Each subject was asked to select photos that would appear with the published study from a set of 4 photos, a piece of 2 teammates and 2 members of the opposing team. The subjects with suppressed medial prefrontal cortex activity chose the least flattering photos of the opposing team members, but not of their own teammates. So what they found, and it's kind of similar, but to a way less intense and creepy extent, what Milgram found in the famous shock study, that's Milgram making his face on the right. What they found during this study was that people are more likely to cause harm to people that they see as a different group member than to people who they identify with. This is a nice way of using neuroimaging to try to get insight into something that behaviorally has been really hard to explore, says David Rand, an assistant professor of psychology at Yale University, who was not involved in the research. It's been hard to get a direct handle on the extent to which people within a group are tapping into their own understanding of things versus the group's understanding. And this concept over here that we're kind of getting into and that we're kind of approaching is this concept of groupthink, which is the idea that when you're in a group of people and an idea is proposed to the group, other people are more likely to jump onto that idea and support it because of the group nature, because people are concerned that they're going to be seen as outsiders within the group that they're present to. So an idea when presented in a group gets adopted much faster and grows because of the group dynamics, and not always because of the success of the idea itself. Getting lost. The researchers also found that after the game, people with reduced medial prefrontal cortex activity had more difficulty remembering the moral statements they had heard during the game. If you need to encode something with regard to the self, and that ability is somehow undermined when you're competing with a group, then you should have poor memory associated with that reduction in medial prefrontal cortex signal. And that's exactly what we see, Sakara says. That's a lot of psychology mumbo jumbo in one sentence. So basically what they're saying is, if you're encoding something, which means if you are trying to create a memory of something, so if you're trying to create a memory or encode information with regard to the self. So if you're trying to learn about yourself, if you're trying to remember something moral, that ability is harmed when you're competing with a group. So when you're in a group setting and you're trying to remember something or create some aspect of your identity, it's way more difficult than when you're alone. Sakara hopes to follow up on these findings to investigate what makes some people more likely to become lost in a group than others. She is also interested in studying whether people are slower to recognize themselves or pick themselves out of a photo lineup after being absorbed in a group activity. Alright, so here we have some questions to take home. When are we responsible for our actions, legally or morally? You'll notice that that's the same question as the last that we ended with last time. Can the same group dynamics that cause riots and mob violence ever be used for positive actions? What in-groups are you a part of? Who do you identify with in your life? What out-groups or others are you not a part of in your own mind? Who do you not identify with in your life? How do you interact differently with people who are in your group versus those who you perceive as the out-group? So these are all questions that could potentially lead us towards some epiphanies, towards some ideas about how we decide what's right and wrong, depending on what our group believes to be right or wrong. Do you use other people to determine what right or wrong is, or is it something that's entirely internally produced? These are questions that you should be wrestling with or thinking about, and may help you lead to a better essay 3 as we get closer to our outline. All right. Like I said, we're going to do all this work together in class. This lesson lasts about 30 minutes. For a 50-minute course, we'll have about 15-20 minutes at the end of class to work on anything you'd like to work on. Reading number 1, Zimbardo, and reading number 2, Saxe, are both in the past at this point. Voice and choice number 2 is something we talked about as well, so we could work on voice and choice number 2, reading number 1, Zimbardo, or reading number 2, Saxe. We haven't done the third reading yet. We will be doing that at the end of this week. We also haven't started essay number 3 outline, so really at the end of class we could just work on those top 3 green things. We hit our learning targets. Thank you very much for listening along. I hope you have a great afternoon. Bye.